Hello, everyone. Welcome to Humanist Canada's monthly webinar series. I'm still Anna Popovich, Program Director at Humanist Canada and your host this afternoon. This webinar will be 60 minutes in length. We'll have a Q&A period at the end of the presentation. If you have a question and would like to ask it directly, please raise your hand at the bottom of the screen. You can also submit your question or comment with the Q&A tool at the bottom of the screen as well. And this webinar will be recorded. Today, we will be discussing the use of radio broadcasting to deliver communication justice in Africa. And I'm joined by the Executive Director of Farm Radio International, Kevin Perkins. Under Kevin's tenure, the organization has grown into a global leader in developing and delivering life-changing rural communication services to hundreds of millions of people across Sub-Saharan Africa. Kevin's tenure at Farm Radio was preceded by 16 years in leadership roles with 4 different Canadian charities and nonprofits, including CAP AIDS, the Riverdale Community Development Corporation, the Access Riverdale Community Loan Fund, and Canadian Physicians for Aid and Relief. Kevin studied international development and voluntary sector management at the University of Toronto and York University, respectively. Welcome, Kevin, and it's great to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So I have prepared some slides just to help. Shall I just launch in, Anna, to the presentation?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, good. Then let me just share my screen so that you're able to see the slides. And here we go. Welcome. So Farm Radio International, it's an organization that is based in Canada, or at least was founded in Canada, but now also works in many parts of Sub-Saharan Africa directly and through our network of African radio stations. So I'm just going to run through some slides to help me present how we do our work, what it is we do, why we do it, and some of the results that we achieve, as well as some of what we're looking at in the future. Why is this not advancing? There we are. So, what the main vision that inspires the work we do is just wanting to see the hard work of African farming families lead to prosperity and food security for themselves and their communities and countries. And we see that the radio can play a really important role in that. Perhaps many of you know, small-scale farmers are the main producers of food. They produce the majority of food in Africa for their own families, their own communities, for urban markets and otherwise. And yet when you look at the statistics of who's most likely to experience food insecurity, whereas who's most likely to experience poverty and poor health, it's most often the farmers that are producing the food. Why would the producers of food also be the main ones to experience hunger? Now, there's many reasons for that, and I won't go into all of them, but one of them is the big barriers is information poverty. To do well in farming, to do well in connecting to markets, to do well in accessing the timely sort of inputs at the right time, especially with climate change and all the changes in weather patterns that climate change, not just weather patterns, but others that climate change is bringing, and it requires information to make good decisions in this complex and changing environment. And information can be very difficult to access in rural communities. It's very seldom in their own language. It's often in written form, usually in one of the dominant languages, and they may not have the means to access some of the more digital internet-based information. And then, whereas in the past they might have, and still today have, opportunities to meet with a government agricultural extension worker who can advise them. in many cases, the number of farmers per extension worker is just too great for them to have any access to them, really. So we turn to radio, a simple and accessible tool that's still available. It's the most popular medium still. Whenever you do surveys in rural areas and ask farming families, what do you like to turn to most for your information? Radio is almost always number one. They rely on it for information, also, of course, for entertainment, connection with their countries, news, to sports and so forth. But really, agricultural information is one of the vital things that they turn to. And health information, nutrition information, and so forth is something they go to radio for. It's available to practically everyone. The languages are the languages that, of the farmers themselves. Their vocabulary, their traditional languages, especially important for women who are more likely to mainly speak the vernacular and really need services to be offered up in the languages that they speak at home. It has the power to transform lives. It's effective. It really can lead to change for the individuals, families, but for the communities at large. And really, and this is where part of the headline for this presentation comes, is that it really is being transformed, radio, thanks to some of the more accessible digital technologies, which I'll talk more about later. So just a snapshot of where we're at today. We have nearly 1,300 African radio stations in our network. What that means is that they sign up to connect with us, to link with us. We offer them a variety of services and resources, which I'll talk more about later, which are designed to help them improve their development-oriented radio programs, farm programs, but others as well. So nearly 1,300 across 38 countries of Sub-Saharan Africa. Incredible reach, at least, and it's very hard to do an accurate tally of all the listeners and people served by these 1,300 almost radio stations, but it's certainly over 250 million. And we also, and I'll talk more about this as we go on, in addition to working through that 1,300, just shy of 1,300 African radio stations, we also implement projects together in partnership with others that we call Radio for Development projects. And at this moment in time, we have about 25 of these projects in about 10 different countries on air. So just a little bit more about radio. I mean, it's been around for a very long time. Some people, when I talk to them and say, oh, we work with radio, they kind of look at me and strangely and say, well, you're still using radio? I mean, surely there's something new that's come along that would replace radio, but we still work with radio because it works, and it's what rural people and farming families count on and expect. If there's ever a time they don't need and expect and require and love radio, then we'll stop using it. But for now we do, because it's widespread, still the most popular, as I mentioned earlier. Even in the remotest villages, normally you'll find at least one, sometimes many radio stations broadcasting to them. It's accessible, again, local languages that everyone can understand. It's sort of in an oral, well, it is oral, which agrees with sort of the oral traditions and storytelling traditions that are more common in rural areas. It's accessible for those that can't read or write. And as I mentioned earlier, even if they their local language, they have some literacy, much less likely to have the literacy skills in the languages that most materials are available in: English, French, and Spanish, and so on. It's convenient, plentiful, and portable, reaches people where they live and work. Helps with, it's a multitasking technology. People can enjoy the radio while they're doing other things. Whether it's preparing meals, doing housework, tending to the garden, they can have the radio on. It's inexpensive. It's, in fact, once you have a radio set or something to listen on, And mobile phones in Africa have radios inside them. So people with mobile phones also have radios. So they're quite inexpensive and free to listen to. Really, the only cost is charging or getting batteries for their radios or phones, which is not insignificant, but it's much less expensive than any of the others. It's nimble. Most radio broadcasting is live, and it can shift and adapt to what's happening at any given time. So you're not locked in necessarily to covering a theme or a topic for a long period of time. You can pivot when something new comes along or when new information has to be shared. Interactive is not something radio was really known for in its early days. It was more of a one-way communication tool, not interactive. It went from the host of the radio program to the listener. There were some radio stations had creative ways to bring the voices of their listeners on air, but it didn't happen very often. But today, with mobile phones so prevalent, radio is much more two-way. You can hear such a diversity of voices. Farmers can speak to farmers. They can ask questions of each other, share their own views and experiences. So radio is more of a platform where voices can be heard, knowledge can be shared. And it really works. It's would be one thing if farmers listened to it and they liked it and they found it interesting, but what does it mean in their daily lives? Well, we've done a lot of evaluations in this area, a lot of studies, a lot of research, and have really strong evidence that listening to really good quality programs about particular practices leads to many listeners to applying what they've learned on their farms. 40%, up to 40% of people who just stumble on the program and listen to it can be found to actually apply the practice on their farms. And we're able to compare those who listen to those who don't have access to the program to make sure that really we can attribute the change to them listening to the radio. And indeed, listeners are always much more likely to apply the practice than people who haven't listened. And the cost is low. To provide a whole series of programs, the cost is about 50 cents per farming family, which really is a fraction of other means of communicating with rural people. So where we work, this is a partial map. As I mentioned, we have 38 countries where we have partners, but then also in 11 countries, we have either offices with staff or we engage local partners to run communication for development or radio for development projects. Gives us quite a vast reach. And we always work when we do projects, but even when we develop our resources and services for the network of radio stations, we work with a wide range of development partners, funders, but also agricultural research organizations, farmers organizations. Increasingly, we've been working with women's rights organizations because radio is such a powerful way to bring women's voices to the fore and to address the communication needs of women. So increasingly working with organizations of that kind as well. So a huge diversity of partners that we work with. And just to build on that, there's the radio stations, of course, the ones I mentioned already. There's the project partners, such as the ones I just showed you. And then we work a lot with what we call knowledge partners. Again, research organizations, specialists to help them get information out to rural people. So there's three different, broadly, elements to our work. One is we call radio resources, which involves offering services, resources, training to improve the rural radio programs of many stations across Sub-Saharan Africa. We do a lot of work in innovation, new ways to use radio, but also new ways to integrate radio with other digital communication tools to make it more powerful, and as I mentioned, more interactive. And then the radio projects that we run, targeted projects that use radio to achieve specific development outcomes, specific results at scale. So just I'll go into a little more detail about each. On the radio resources, I'll start with that because this is really where our roots lie. The very first service that Farm Radio International offered when it was called Developing Countries Farm Radio Network was packages of radio scripts that were developed across the global south, really, taking a look at sustainable farming practices across the global south, turning those into radio scripts, and then sharing them out with a network of radio stations for them to use in their programs. So what we do today is similar. We continue to support radio stations produce better, more and better programs for their listeners with some of the resources they need. And here's just a sample of some of the services we offer them. We generate what we call resource packs. These are packages of scripts and other useful information, interviews, dramas, background information, and offer these up in packages, really organized around themes. And they're available, they're sent out when they're available, but then they're always available. We have a website called farmradio.fm, and any broadcaster can go there and use these resources at any time. Bars of Wire is an e-news service that we developed, and it's meant to serve journalists, broadcasters in Africa, keeping them updated with news stories about small-scale farming, rural development, rural agriculture in Africa. Just recognizing that the hosts of rural radio programs are often in search of more information to keep their programs up to date and current with valuable, valid, relevant information for their small-scale farmer listeners. And Bars of Wire does that. We facilitate e-discussions. These are online discussions that bring together broadcasters, dozens or even hundreds of broadcasters together to have discussions on a variety of topics. We've done recently an e-discussion on climate change adaptation. We've done them on gender equality, recently on one interesting one on positive masculinity that was quite popular. And these e-discussions facilitated in English, French, and even looking at doing them in other languages, Portuguese, Amharic, allow broadcasters to learn from each other and give each other ideas and access new information. We offer a variety of training programs. Most of them are online. We have e-learning, self-guided e-learning modules and courses. And we also do direct in-station training for some radio stations that we work with to help them improve the quality of their programs. So we just have an example quote here from one of our partners at Radio Free Africa saying, "I find their farm radio resource packs most useful because they're easy to use. The topics relate well with the things in my community, and they help to inspire new ideas for different radio programs." And that's really how we see these resources, not necessarily scripts to be read word for word, but inspiration, ideas, and information that they can use in the particular programs here. The other area around innovations is, again, constantly seeking ways to make radio better, more relevant, using new technologies. So we pioneered a number of digital solutions and developed new approaches that make radio more entertaining, effective, and more interactive, easier to monitor, easier to share in podcast form, and so forth. So one example that we're quite proud of is a service called Uliza. Uliza is a Swahili word for ask, to ask, and it was developed as a tool to ask rural listeners what they think about issues. It's evolved, and we've added new services all the time to it, so that it allows listeners to engage in all kinds of different ways with the content of radio programs, whether they give feedback or whether they access the content on demand when they're available, not just when the program is on the air. And the screen there you'll see in that slide is what the broadcaster looks at when they've opened up Uliza. So the broadcaster can be in the studio broadcasting their show, asking a question of their audience, and they can actually monitor in real time how their listeners are responding to the question, the feedback they're giving, how they're answering poll questions. And there's even a mapping feature there sometimes that allows them to see where different responses, how people in different parts of the country feel differently about the topic under discussion. So we've had over 150 of our radio partners use ULISA to interact, and they've been able to hear from and engage and interact with over 1 million listeners. We've also done a lot of innovation in radio program approaches. Some really interesting programs, one that has become very important to our work, we call Her Voice on Air. And the Her Voice on Air program invites groups of women to reflect on a question, think about what they want to say, and when they're ready, they phone a number for free, and they leave their groups thinking and thoughts about the question. And the question can be about, what's a fair sharing of work at home, or what's the best way to divide household tasks? What's the best way? How important is it for girls to attend school, and how can we support them in doing that? So they reflect on these questions and share their own views. And then the following radio program takes these voice recordings and blends them into a format of radio that kind of shares consecutively the views and input of different groups of women right across the listening area of the radio station. So groups who otherwise no one's ever heard from them, maybe don't even know that their village exists. Suddenly they're on broadcast and having their views shared, and it's very empowering. So that's just one example of a new approach to radio that we've developed over the years. Some of the approaches that we've used, participatory radio campaigns. I just talked about Her Voice on Air. We've done some really interesting work on cooking shows, very entertaining, interesting programs, encourage production and consumption of really nutritious meals, using locally available and grown crops in ways that really maximize health benefits. And we all know how popular cooking shows are here, usually on TV or streamed. But they can be very good in audio format too when they're done well, when you can hear the sound of the onion frying and the carrots being chopped and the cooks talking while they're preparing the meal. It's a really great kind of radio. And further, when the show is done, listeners are invited to phone a number, flash a phone number, and then they'll have the recipe sent to their phone automatically. Radio Marketplace, where we try to help small-scale farmers link with understand the needs of their buyers and make links and connections with different buyers and suppliers. Listening Post is a way, and now a similar program we call On-Air Dialogues is a series of programs that we just designed for the express purpose of giving a platform to rural people to share their own experiences and views about a variety of topics. We're doing one of these on-air dialogues right now with the International Fund for Agricultural Development, where rural people are being asked how climate change is impacting them, what they're doing now to adapt, and what kind of support they need to further adapt to a changing climate. The third area I mentioned is radio projects, and we have the tagline here. It's about bringing good ideas to scale, because radio, one of its great benefits is the scale, the reach. We combine radio and mobile phones in all of our projects to give it really impactful programming where we can really see changes happening across wide areas among large numbers of people. Much larger than would be possible, sort of the direct community engagement approach. So we have some steps in our projects that we always follow. We always begin with formative research, where we try to find out from, we do find out from the rural communities, what do they already know about this topic? What else would they like to learn about? What are some of the challenges they're facing? But also, interestingly, which radio program do they like to listen to? Which host do they trust? When are they available to listen? And that allows us to design the program find the radio partner, even find a host that listeners trust, and it's broadcast at a time they'll be available to listen. We offer capacity development support for the radio station so that they're able to deliver the program. It's a radio program, radio station's own program. We're help them design it, but then they deliver it with our support, and we make sure that they have the skills and the tools to do that. We design the radio programs very carefully. They get broadcast, produced and broadcast. We have ways of monitoring and assuring the quality, that the programs are going out on schedule, the topics are being covered. We have a way of having each program uploaded to something we call the ULISA log, sort of a cloud space where we can go at any time and listen to what's gone on the air and see what's actually reaching the listeners in the end. And we do very careful monitoring and evaluation and reporting. What's been learned? What kind of impact are we seeing from the project? So some of the themes or topics that we cover, there's a wide range. People think, well, obviously agriculture, Farm Radio International is the name of the organization. Clearly agriculture would be part of it. But people are often surprised to learn the range of other themes that we covered. Increasingly doing work on climate change, environmental sustainability. With respect to climate change, we've just embarked on a new program that is aimed at helping rural people share their stories and learn about nature-based solutions for climate adaptation. It's a new area for us, and we're engaging many partners across 6 different countries to produce very interesting nature-based solutions. Gender equality is a really important theme for us. All programs are gender responsive to the needs of women and men, but we also increasingly aim to have the programs aim for a transformative impact to really help rural people think about and act on power relations, roles and responsibilities of women and men, and think how they can bring change in their communities to give a stronger voice, but also make sure that the benefits as well as the work are shared more equitably. Health and nutrition is a very important theme. And often we're called upon to respond to emergencies. COVID-19 was one case where we really had to make some shifts and adjustments to help rural people understand, what is this COVID-19? How can they protect themselves? How can they get their questions answered? We were called upon to address a lot of the disinformation that was coming to them, a lot of the myths or concerns, apprehensions. We could respond to that quickly. There have been times when we've responded to, for example, drought. Failure of crops. We had a very good program going about sorghum at one time in Ethiopia, when suddenly a drought hit and the sorghum was strained, and there was no purpose really us in continuing along the same line with the program about sorghum. So we changed tack and really continued the rest of the program to focus on what they can do to adapt and cope with the very low rainfall that year. So again, we have really want to be sure that the work we're doing is popular, that rural people can access it and enjoy listening to it and participate in it. But we're also interested in results. We're interested in seeing change. It's not information just for the sake of information, but to help bring about change. And as I said earlier, we have done a lot of research and evaluation, both our own and times we've engaged third-party evaluators to take a hard look at what we're doing and the kind of effects it has. And as I mentioned earlier, 40% of those who tune into a program supported by Farm Radio bring about some kind of change in their community. And when you consider how many millions and millions of people listen, 40% is a lot of people making a change, which starts to have an impact at a community and even a national level potentially. There's also the issue of scale. I've talked a lot about scale, and I think this is a really important aspect of development. We often hear about wonderful projects at a community level, and we think about ways that individual families and communities are really changing and benefiting. But unless there's a way to take that to a bigger scale, to have many more people learn about it and benefit from it, it's going to be pretty isolated, pretty kind of one-off changes. So that's where we really feel our work is important, in taking good ideas and helping them reach the kind of scale where they're really transforming things. And as you'll see from this map, we came up with a way to map the reach of our radio partners. This is just for projects, and it's not even the most recent map, but it shows that there are some countries where the entire country, or the vast majority of the people in the country, are being served and learning about and taking up new practices at a big scale. So just a little, I guess, boasting in terms of recognition. We're increasingly recognized, Farm Radio International, as being a leader in this space of radio for rural development, communication for development. And some of those include Charity Intelligence, which maybe some of you have heard of as an organization that rates and ranks charities across Canada. And this year we got the highest rating, the 5-star rating, as a highly effective Canadian charity. And we've been recognized by a number of other organizations for innovation and impact. WISIS is the World Summit for Information Society. It's a big annual event organized by the International Telecommunication Union, and they offer prizes for organizations that are doing remarkable work. And we got the second WISIS prize just last May. And that's what I prepared for now. And so this leaves plenty of time for discussion, answering your questions, responding to other ideas that people want to talk about, or feedback that people want to offer, or questions. So I'll just turn it back to you, Anna, and see what kind of questions are coming, or any other kinds of comments that people want to make.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. Very interesting presentation. I would like to invite questions or comments from the audience. Once again, you can use the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen, or you can raise your hand and unmute yourself. David.
Unmute. There. Is this
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
We can hear. Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Fantastic presentation. Two things came to mind going through this. There's obviously an amazing need for rural radio exactly like this in places like Africa. I'd be very interested to hear what Kevin might have to say about rural radio for Indigenous peoples in Canada, which seems to be a very interesting sort of sideline, a very parallel idea that there's a lot of people who are in remote areas who don't have access to a lot of our information and knowledge. And the other thing was who provides funding to RFI for the delivery of their programming? A couple of points.
Good. Yeah, excellent. Well, you're absolutely right that the radio can play and is playing a similar role with Indigenous communities in Canada. Had some good interactions with a Canadian Indigenous organization that does work with media, including radio, and just really highlighting. And in fact, there was an important study done about 5 years ago, and the name of it is going to come to me in a second, but I don't remember it right now. But it was a study looking at spoken from the heart. It's a study called Spoken from the Heart, and UNESCO commissioned this study. And it looked at the role of Indigenous radio, and also how it functions. And very interesting to see some of the kind of regulatory challenges, with a lot of indigenous radio stations kind of occupying a bit of a gray area, and the really important need for a new regulatory environment to support indigenous radio, and the vital importance of it in language preservation, but also in providing really concrete, specific communication needs of indigenous communities. And just anecdotally, plenty of stories about, for example, people who are in a difficult situation in a rural area. They're isolated for whatever reason and needing some support. They can phone the radio station and have an announcement broadcast, and someone will come with help. So that kind of level of importance, just even with that kind of reaching out from isolated areas with a request for help, all kinds of sort of advertisements of things people have for sale or things people are looking to buy, weather information and so forth. So important to, especially to people who are deriving their livelihood from the land. So I see that as a really important area for more, attention to make sure that the Indigenous radio is well supported and has the resources it needs to fulfill its role, even better than it already is doing. I mean, it's doing a wonderful job, but is always struggling just to stay on air consistently, which is true of so many rural African radio stations as well. The funding that we have, excellent question. Canadians donate to support the work of farm radio. That's a really important source of support. It really gives us a firm basis upon which to go to other organizations, foundations, Global Affairs Canada, International Fund for Agricultural Development. The IKEA Foundation has recently come on board as an important funder. The German aid organization GIZ. In the past, we've had funding from Rockefeller and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So really a diverse range, and really always we engage other partners in our work, so that the funding that comes is always to support partnership work. Of course, the partnership work with radio stations, but also we need to make sure that the knowledge partners are involved, the farmers organizations are involved, and so forth.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
A question, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, please, Anna.
Yeah, a question in the Q&A. How do you address problems with disinformation campaigns? How do you address disinformation? And you mentioned that a bit, maybe you want to expand on that? Yes.
Well, radio is a wonderful way to reach people and share information, but just as good at sharing disinformation as it is at sharing good information. So it's really an important area, and our approach really is to create environments, kind of communities of practice, where broadcasters can come together, do fact checks with each other on the information they're hearing, where we can encourage them to be on the lookout for disinformation, to when they hear something that sounds a little suspicious, to connect with their peers and with us to think about how to counter it. A lot can be done through that direct work with the journalists, with the broadcasters, helping them be better journalists, to recognize and identify disinformation, challenge it instead of amplifying it on the radio. But certainly, you see some of a lot of people are aware kind of what the kind of shock radio programs. There's been a lot lately in the States about the role of radio and really driving some disinformation, but also really extreme views and so forth. So it has that potential. So again, the key for us is to just work with the journalists and the broadcasters, the hosts, make sure that they're getting the best information they can and asking good questions and practicing good journalistic skills. The range for FM, well, I don't know, I can't give you a number, but it really varies tremendously. Some radio stations maybe just serve a few communities in a 50-kilometer radius or even less, some nationwide. And those that are nationwide, they usually have repeater towers that send the signal out to other parts of the country. So it varies tremendously from a few communities with tens of thousands to, or even a few thousand listeners, to the whole country and 100 million or 50 million people.
And a follow-up question on that. In the case of your COVID campaign, how many people would you say you reached?
Well,
did you have to combat a lot of disinformation? What was the impact of the radio programs in this specific case?
Yeah, well, we've had two programs around COVID. The first program was just a sort of a quick response to the needs that radio stations were experiencing when COVID hit. We knew that the radio stations needed information, but also their revenues were taking a hit because the lockdowns and the shutdowns, their advertisers weren't buying ads anymore. They're worried about the health of their own staff. They were hearing disinformation. They didn't know where to turn for accurate information. So it was about a 6-month initiative where we just really focused on shoring up radio stations' capacity to stay on the air and provide their listeners with good information and to stay healthy themselves. The second project has really been dealing more with accurate information about COVID prevention, and we really decided to tackle the question of vaccines and really help broadcasters get their questions answered about vaccines and be effective advocates of it, or at least providing information in ways that allowed rural people to make more informed decisions with accurate information and timely information. And that project, we've worked with about 220 radio stations across, I think it's 18 different countries. And those 220 stations between them, I'm sure have reached 50 million people. And it's been a really good way, not only to get good programs on the air at these stations, and they all broadcast programs. We worked with them to design and put good programs out on the air about COVID and about vaccines. But even just helping the broadcasters take those steps themselves of getting themselves vaccinated to get that protection for themselves as well. So it's just kind of coming to a conclusion. This one year project we had on vaccines is just coming to a conclusion. We kind of launched it because we heard that vaccines are going to be more available, but there is a lot of concern they wouldn't be taken up because of concerns, the disinformation and so forth. So we thought, well, if the vaccines are there and they can be helpful, we have a role to play to help people be assured that they can get vaccinated in confidence.
And did you collaborate with policymakers?
Yes, we work very closely with Ministry of Health officials, local World Health Organization organizations, and other popular organizations. I mentioned about the work with women's rights organizations and farmers organizations, so they were involved as partners in this as well.
Can you give us an example, or maybe a couple of examples, of the kind of impact that radio programs have had in local communities?
The kind of impact it's had, did you say in local communities?
Local communities, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Craig, good question. Well, I've talked about the role of helping individual farmers make different choices, apply new practices, whether it's the spacing of their, how far apart they put their rows of sorghum, plant their rows of sorghum, to bigger decisions at the family level. At the community level, we're increasingly looking at action that can be done collectively at the community level, whether it's deciding to protect a wetland, so that it provides better protection to flooding, whether it's to agree to set aside a forest that that provides sort of native species of plants and forest and good habitat for other animals. So working at that community level, we're starting to see communities come together and decide collectively to take some action. I see Craig's two questions here, and I can start with the second one first about Nora Young. Nora Young is the host and creator of Spark on CBC Radio, and yeah, she's still on the board of directors. She plays a really valuable role on the board, bringing her knowledge of radio, but also some of her knowledge on technology and how technology affects radio, but life as well. And she's one of the judges on our we have a prize we call the Liz Hughes Award, and it's a prize that's offered to the radio station that offers a radio program that does the best job at amplifying women's voices and promoting gender equality. And the radio stations that want to be considered for the award, they present a description of their programs, an audio sample of their program, and Nora is among the people who helps to judge those submissions. So that's just one of the many roles that Nora plays. Article 19, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Well, Article 19 is the information related article, and it declares that people's right to access and share and impart information regardless of frontiers by any medium available. And this is really, we're increasingly see our work as being about upholding that right. It's recognizing that not everybody has equal access to the information they need to make good decisions and doesn't have opportunities to share and impart information with others. And by using radio, that's the word that was used in the introduction to this session was communication justice. So the idea that in order for everyone to be able to enjoy those rights, the information rights outlined in Article 19, there needs to be more focus and more efforts and more investments put towards those sources of information that are relevant and accessible and appropriate for those with least access. And we see radio as being key to that, and the work that we do really helping to uphold the rights of the most marginalized people to enjoy those communication rights. World Radio Day is always on, that's your next question, Craig. When is the next World Radio Day? It always falls on February the 13th. And we've been involved from the beginning, doing something to bring attention to radio on World Radio Day, whether it's hosting a webinar similar to this, whether it's inviting people. We've had in the past, we've invited Canadians to phone a number and leave a short message as to what they love about radio. And we're able to collect voices, not just in Canada, but across Africa, about people talking about the value of radio for them. There's things that we do at the country level as well. In Ghana, we're always hosting large events for World Radio Day. So it's an important day for us, of course, one we really enjoy participating in.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments?
I think I saw David Wood's hand up a while ago. Maybe his question was answered, though.
David, do you have a question?
No, I'm fine. I will remove my hand.
Sorry. Go.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Kevin, can you say a few words about forum theater? I found that on your website.
Say more about what? Pardon me?
Forum theater.
Forum theater?
Yep. I'll put it in the Q&A.
Okay. I'm not quite.
Forum theater projects. I read about it on your website. I mean, maybe you're not doing, maybe you're not doing that at the moment.
No,
the
no, we
Brechtian way of engaging the audience.
Yes. Well, we certainly do a lot of drama, radio drama programs, and we the approach to drama that we take is a very interactive approach, and maybe forum theater like, in the sense that after each episode, listeners are invited to share their own thoughts, respond to some questions, and we can even see the drama taking slight shifts based on the audience interaction and feedback. So one very good example of that is a series of 2 seasons of dramas we did in Malawi. And interestingly, the theme was adolescent mental health. So the radio program featured a drama that was a little bit like, if you remember the show Degrassi Junior High. So it was sort of a drama about young people and going through relationship traumas and troubles with their teacher and their parents. But in the midst of this was a young person experiencing depression and anxiety, and then learning through the course of the drama how that person could be supported. And after each episode, there's an interactive component where listeners could call in or vote on questions with their phones, or there could be panel discussions they'd participate in where they'd sort of talk about the drama and related to their own lives. And the discussion that came out as a result of that would, as I said, kind of influence future episodes of the drama. So that's a very powerful way to shift some thinking, address the stigma around mental health for adolescents, and shift the kinds of support and services that were available to young people experiencing depression and anxiety.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? I'm not sure if we have Colombian listeners on the call. Teresa from Colombia, a couple of colleagues were going to join us. If anybody wants to say hello. Oh, here's a question in the Q&A. Do you coordinate with established NGOs most of the time, or rely on your own community members or staff for programs?
Mm-hmm. Well, we do both. What our own staff and what community members and radio broadcasters bring is sort of a knowledge of radio and how to design and produce radio programs that can be effective and entertaining and relevant to their listeners. But then if there's an area of content specialty, then we reach out and we collaborate with other partners. Sometimes those partners are NGOs, sometimes they're research organizations, sometimes they're people's organizations like farmers organizations. So the content or the specifics of the information that goes on air, we always collaborate with partners to help us get that right. But then the how to design the programs, how to deliver them, how to make them interactive, what techniques and technologies to use is what our staff have the expertise in.
Thank you. What are some of the pressing issues that you find in the countries and communities you work in? I mean, climate change is one of them.
Yes.
Mental health, you just mentioned. Gender justice, I guess, would be another one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Those are some of the big ones. Right now, many parts of Africa are experiencing some serious food security challenges. And there are a lot of questions people are having. Part of it has to do with climate, but part of it too has, for example, availability of fertilizers. And they're just, this has been one of the effects of the war in Ukraine, is that fertilizer prices are skyrocketing and the cost of food is going so high. So this is an area we're trying to grapple with, how to help radio listeners, rural people, what kind of information or what kind of engagement can they have around those issues. Nutrition, very important area. in rural communities access to education in school. We've been doing some very interesting projects that really try to examine the barriers or the reasons that girls aren't going to school at the same rate as boys in many countries. So we've done an entire series. We're doing an entire series in Mali, aiming to encourage parents to figure out how their girls and why their daughters should go to school and stay in school, addressing challenges like early marriage and some of the other barriers to girls completing their education. So that's a very important issue. Just I think the livelihood and youth livelihoods generally comes up a lot as a very important area. For one thing, about half of the people who live in Africa are youth, under 18 and under. And for the other, there's a lot of concern that some of the challenges that countries are facing with armed groups and armed insurrections and some of the insecurity has to do with the lack of livelihood opportunities for youth. That there's much more to it, of course, than that, but that is one of the factors. And so there's a lot of interest in finding radio program that supports young people and establishing good livelihoods, farming as a business, or other kind of rural livelihoods that make rural life viable for them and see themselves as having a future in their communities.
Right, thank you. And just a question about the logistics. You're in so many countries. How do you coordinate and articulate such a vast network of broadcasters? And would you say there's cumulative knowledge that comes out of this?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
In the early days of the organization, when it was called Developing Countries Farm Radio Network, the interactions with the radio station was all pen and paper on letters mailed back and forth. And we'd mail out packages of scripts and then wait for the radio broadcasters to write back and say how they used them and give us some feedback and maybe ask for some additional support. Well, today, that's been one of the big benefits of technology for our work, is that broadcasters can be brought together in small groups, large groups, and our staff teams. We have daily meetings on Zoom and Google Meet with colleagues. The possibilities for collaboration across countries are just immense now, and the opportunities for staff and broadcaster partners to share ideas with each other has really expanded. WhatsApp has been a fantastic platform actually for groups of staff and broadcasters to meet regularly and share information and keep each other posted about new developments.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for the presentation. Good luck with your work. Thank you. It sounds amazing. I hope you expand to other regions as well. And just a couple of announcements as we wrap up. If you have a moment to share your thoughts about the webinar or suggest a topic or a speaker, please fill out the post-webinar survey. You will find the link in Zoom's follow-up email. Our next webinar will take place on November 26th at noon Eastern Time. And we will be joined by Canadian Armed Forces Chaplain Captain Mary Claire Kadij, who will talk about her experience as a humanist chaplain in the armed forces. And on that note, once again, thanks, Kevin, for the wonderful presentation. And thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thanks again for the invitation.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice rest of your day. Thank you.